individual needs. It's time to stop the war on coal, and I urge my colleagues to support our amendment on the underlying bill. I yield back.
The gentleman from North Dakota yields back. The gentleman from Arizona reserves. For what purpose the gentleman from California seek
Mr. Chairman, I seek to control the time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, I oppose this amendment. It would make a terrible bill even worse. Our nation's environmental laws are founded on cooperative federalism. This is how it works. The federal government sets minimum standards to ensure that every American has a basic level of protection so no one is forced to breathe dirty air or drink dirty water. Then the states decide how to meet those standards or set stronger standards if they choose. The states also implement the programs they adopt. Finally, if a state fails to act, EPA can step in and do the job itself. This approach has worked well for over 40 years. It means that there is a healthy give and take between the states and the Environmental Protection Agency. The states receive federal funds and they run their own programs, but EPA has the tools to encourage the states to do more where necessary. Before Congress adopted the Clean Air Act in 1970 and the Clean Water Act in 1972, both signed by President Nixon, it was up to the states to control pollution. The problem was that many of them didn't do it. We had rivers catch on fire, smog so thick you couldn't see nearby mountains, and a tremendous toll on public health and lives. It wasn't that states didn't want to clean up pollution, but if there are no minimum standards, states are forced into a race to the bottom. If a state wants to reduce pollution from oil refineries, the oil industry could threaten to build its new refineries in another state with looser requirements. The result is that states were afraid to require industry to clean up to the levels needed to protect the public. This amendment, like other provisions already in the bill, overthrows the principles of cooperative federalism that have guided us for 40 years. Instead, it would leave various pollution control decisions almost entirely up to the states. The proponents of this amendment claim that it is about EPA's regional haze program. Every member should understand that this amendment is not limited to regional haze. The first part of the amendment is remarkably broad. It applies to all of the criteria air pollutants regulated by the states: smog, NOx, fine particulates, and it applies in every area that is not meeting the health-based air quality standards. This amendment says that even when a state fails to act, fails to control air pollution, EPA can no longer provide a backstop. EPA must wait at least 2 years before they can fill in for the state's failures. And there's no deadline for EPA ever to act, allowing unhealthy air quality to persist indefinitely. Citizens of that state would no longer have any recourse. The second part of this amendment effectively eliminates minimum national criteria to protect air quality in our national parks. The Clean Air Act has special provisions to protect air quality in the pristine lands that the nation has set aside for all Americans to enjoy: our national parks, national monuments, and wilderness areas. After all, we go to the Grand Canyon to see the view. There's little point in protecting these lands if we allow their air and water to be polluted. This amendment targets those Clean Air Act provisions. It says that when it comes to protecting the air quality of the national parks that belong to all Americans, the state where a park is located has sole discretion to decide how much, if any, pollution control would be required. EPA would no longer be able to require a minimum level of pollution reductions, and if the state failed to act entirely, as some have done, EPA would no longer be able to step in and set pollution controls. The practical effect of this amendment would be to allow some of the oldest and dirtiest power plants in the country to continue polluting without standard pollution controls. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
I thank the gentleman, and I'll yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would like to support and thank my colleagues, Congressman Jeff Flake and Rick Berg, and support this amendment. I represent the areas where 2 of the Arizona plants threatened by the EPA's heavy-handed regulations are located, the Coronado Generating Station in St. John's and the Cholla plant near Joseph City. The 3rd plant, the Apache Generating Station near Wilcox, is just 100 miles away and serves a good portion of my constituents in the southern part of my district. These are bedrock to our local communities. They provide high-paying jobs where unemployment is already over 10%. Over the August recess, the Environmental Protection Agency held public hearings in Phoenix, Holbrook, and Benson on their federal plan. Each of the hearings in rural Arizona had over 300 people present. That is an incredible turnout in these relatively small towns. That is how important this issue is to my constituents. The EPA refused to hold a hearing in St. John's, despite being a community directly impacted by the regulations. So I hosted a meeting to facilitate the submission of public comments. On a night where the local high school had their first football game and the county fair was taking place, we still had over 100 people show up. Listen, everybody wants clean air and good-paying jobs. The fact of the matter is the EPA is acting well beyond its authority and under public law in my state and many others across the country. Vote yes for our amendment.
Time's expired. The gentleman from Arizona reserves.
I reserve.
The gentleman from California is recognized. The gentleman from California has 15 seconds remaining.
I urge members to oppose this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back the remainder of his time. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized. The gentleman from Arizona has 3 minutes remaining.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, this is an interesting conversation when you deal with how this all came about. In January of 2009, the Sierra Club and several other organizations sued the EPA to expand their authority, to expand what was the law. The EPA ruled out of court in a settlement with them, and what was taken to a judge as a consent decree to expand what was the policy, what was the law. So several questions have to be answered here. One is, does the executive branch have the authority to be able to change a law through an agreement with the Sierra Club or any other organization? Number 2 is, what is this all about? If you're dealing with visibility issues, you're dealing not with health issues specifically stated in the air quality, and all that happened with regional haze was this is not about health. This is about visibility. In my state, there's one of the national parks that will change 2 deciviews with the federal implementation plan rather than the state implementation plan. That will cost ratepayers in Oklahoma millions and millions of dollars for something that cannot be seen by the human eye. This is about jobs. This is about who makes the decision, and I do not like the assumption that only people in Washington, D.C. care about the people of Oklahoma. The people of Oklahoma care about the health and safety of the people of Oklahoma. I would vote yes for this amendment.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma, the gentleman from Arizona, and the gentleman from North Dakota for co-sponsoring this amendment. What we're talking about here is regional haze, as mentioned. This is not a health issue. It's a visibility issue. Under the implementation plans being considered by the federal government, let me just take the Navajo Generating Station in northern Arizona. What is being considered is likely an SCR fix, selected catalytic reduction, which would cost $1.1 billion. That would cause the owners of the Navajo Generating Station to simply shut it down. They can't produce economically with these kind of burdens. The benefits of that, we're told by the EPA, is that there would be no perceptible improvement in visibility. None. Man-made sources make up, at best, 5% of all regional haze in Arizona. 5% at best, and so you require a fix costing $1.1 billion for what? No perceptible improvement in visibility at the Grand Canyon. Why are we doing this? And the costs to Arizona are immense. 85% of the power generated or used by the Central Arizona Project to pump water for farmland and whatever else, it comes from the Navajo Generating Station. If you shut down that station, farmers will have to go back to groundwater where they can. What does that do? That depletes our underground resources, causing environmental havoc. This is madness, what is going on. And what this amendment seeks to do is to force the EPA to actually follow the law. The law requires that the EPA sets a standard, and then the state offers a state implementation plan, or a SIP. The problem is the EPA is ignoring what the state submits, just ignoring it, and then entering into negotiations with third-party groups, environmental groups or others, and ignoring the state. We can't allow this to happen anymore. That's why this is a good amendment. I urge its adoption.
Gentleman's time's expired. All time having expired, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from California.
I ask for a roll call vote.
The gentleman from California seeks a roll call vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 13, printed in House Report 112-680. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, seek recognition?
I have amendment made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in House Report number 112-680, offered by Mr. Gosar of Arizona.
Pursuant to House Resolution 788, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I am pleased to put forth an amendment to protect the residents of Arizona from the EPA's attacks on the Navajo Generating Station located near Page, Arizona. The uncertainty surrounding proposed EPA regulations and their effects on the Navajo Generating Station was one of the first issues brought to my attention when I was sworn into Congress. The overreaching regulations would effectively shut down this critical and unique plant. A closure would dramatically increase the cost of water and power for my constituents and eliminate thousands of tribal and non-tribal jobs, all for no discernible improvement in visibility. Again, according to the federal government itself, no discernible improvement in visibility. You see, this plan is unique because it is owned by 6 entities, including the federal government. It was part of a plan created by visionaries so they could provide power to move water from the Colorado River through the aqueduct system ever constructed in the United States to the people of Arizona. You can see it across here. In fact, the CAP water delivers up to 80% of my state's population. This includes 45% of Phoenix's water, the 5th largest city in Arizona in the United States, and 80% of the water to the 32nd largest city in the United States, Tucson. The Arizona today, we know today, would without a doubt not exist if it were not for this plant. The Navajo Generating Station and the associated coal mine directly employs over 1,000 Arizonans, mostly Native Americans. Additionally, according to the Arizona State University study, the plant will indirectly account for more than $20 billion in gross state product and will indirectly provide for 3,000 jobs annually over the next 40 years. I also want to point out a complicated but important part of this issue. The federal government is actually working against itself with these regulations. Revenues from the sales of excess power generated by the plant are used to repay the federal government's debt for the construction of the CAP project. They are also used to help pay for the cost of congressionally authorized Indian water rights settlements between the federal government, tribes, and entities within Arizona. So without these revenues, the federal government will be undermining its own legal agreements with Native Americans and the people of Arizona. Let's put an end to this insanity. Vote for my amendment and stop the EPA from issuing far-reaching regulations and threatening jobs, Arizona's water supply, affordable electricity, and tribal rights established with Congress. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment is narrower than many of the provisions in this bill. Instead of providing a blanket get-out-of-jail-free card for many polluters, like most of the provisions in this bill, this amendment provides a blanket get-out-of-jail-free card for one polluter, the Navajo Generating Station in Arizona. The amendment prohibits EPA from requiring pollution controls if that would adversely impact employment at the Navajo Generating Station or other coal plants or coal mines on tribal lands in northern Arizona. Now, if you listen to the debate on the last amendment, you might think this is another dispute about whether EPA or the state should set the standards. But Arizona has no authority to control air pollution on tribal lands, and the tribe has not established its own program to set the standards. That means that by barring EPA from requiring pollution controls, this amendment would have the effect of ensuring modern pollution controls are not installed on this plant. And that's a problem. The Navajo Generating Station is a huge power plant, over 2,000 megawatts. It's also old. The Navajo Generating Station began operating almost 40 years ago, and it was built without standard pollution controls, and it's dirty. This plant spews almost 20,000 tons of nitrogen oxide, or NOx, each year. This is a dangerous air pollutant. NOx forms small particles that penetrate deep into the lungs, causing emphysema, bronchitis, and other respiratory diseases, heart attacks, and premature deaths. The Navajo Generating Station is the 5th highest emitter of NOx pollution in the United States, and this plant harms air quality at 11 national parks and wilderness areas. These are some of our nation's most treasured and popular national parks. Almost 12 million Americans visit these parks each year. They travel there because it's part of our natural heritage of the nation, and it belongs to all of us. But not if this amendment passes. This amendment says that polluters' interest in continuing to pollute trumps America's interest in having clean air in their national parks. This amendment would remove EPA's authority to protect clean air in the national parks, and I urge my colleagues to stand up for clean air and oppose this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 90 seconds to my friend from Arizona, Mr. Franks.
The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment is offered by Mr. Gosar from Arizona, and it confronts a stunning example of environmentalism run amok. If the Navajo Generating Station is forced to close due to the EPA's nonsensical actions, it would be devastating to the economies of the surrounding region, including those of the Hopi and Navajo tribes. As the sole remaining buyer of coal from the Hopi tribe, shutting down the Navajo Generating Station would cut nearly 90% of the tribe's income and would effectively shut down the Hopi tribe as a functioning government. In addition to putting hundreds of Arizonans, including hundreds of members of the Navajo tribe, out of work and affecting hundreds of thousands of Arizonans' current ability to receive water and electricity. In exchange for all the difficulties created, the only, quote, benefit yielded would be a slight change in visibility, so slight as to not even be detectable without specialized equipment that is significantly more sensitive than the human eye. In other words, Mr. Chairman, the supposed environmental benefit is functionally non-existent. This is far beyond the pale of environmental stewardship. Mr. Chairman, I commend Mr. Gosar for offering this amendment, and I sincerely encourage my colleagues to support it.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, EPA is not going to shut down the power plant, but if this amendment passes, they can do nothing to get some reductions in pollution and work with the power plant to accomplish that goal. I'd like to now yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from New Mexico.
The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment. This amendment is being offered under the guise of protecting tribal sovereignty, when we have seen the complete opposite from the majority during this Congress. We have seen time and time again the majority's unwillingness to ignore tribal issues that are important to Indian country. Case in point is a bill the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, sponsored, H.R. 1904, entitled the Southeast Arizona Land Exchange. This was a giveaway of a sacred site of the San Carlos Apache tribe in Arizona to a copper mining company. When the bill was considered, we heard desperate pleas from tribes across the country asking us to stop a foreign-owned mining company from bulldozing their sacred sites in the name of profit. I offered an amendment to protect the sacred sites. It was straightforward and still would have allowed the mining to take place, but it would have protected those sacred sites. The Republican majority defeated the amendment. Another example is a refusal by some members who are on the floor today to co-sponsor the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. My bill would address years of suffering by those negatively impacted by uranium mining on the Navajo Nation. To this day, members of the Navajo Nation are sick and suffering from the legacy of uranium mining, cancer, kidney disease, and in severe cases, even death. When I'm visiting with Navajo elders and talking to the people impacted by exposure, they ask me, are people in Congress waiting for us to die for the problem to go away? Maybe someone should answer that question. So, Mr. Chairman, my Republican colleagues come down here to say they are supporting and protecting tribal sovereignty.
Chairman, I yield the gentleman another 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
So, Mr. Chairman, my Republican colleague comes down here to say they're supporting and protecting tribal sovereignty with this amendment. Let's take a hard look at their track record on these issues. They seem to only want to support tribal sovereignty when it's convenient, as Mr. Gosar clearly demonstrates. Before offering this amendment, did the gentleman from Arizona even consult with the Navajo Nation on this amendment? What we should be doing is encouraging government-to-government consultation between the tribe and EPA to solve this issue, not by forcing an amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield a minute to my good friend, Mr. Schweiker from Arizona.
The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Gosar, this is one of those moments where do you begin with some of the absurdity that we hear? And I think this might be one I skipped the last set of comments because they had nothing to do with this amendment. Look, the agreement's already there to spend the $45 million to do the high-temperature NOx incineration, and this is way outside my area of expertise, but that's my understanding. And the EPA is coming back and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to spend $1.1 billion for almost a statistically insignificant improvement. Okay, what you're really observing here is the classic case that we see over and over in this sort of issue of sort of environmental political theater up against reality. The math isn't reality. And for someone like myself, who I used to chair the Indian Affairs Committee in my state legislature, I've spent more time on Native American lands in Arizona than I bet you anyone in this body. And the fact of the matter is if the EPA gets their way here, it's going to bust a number of the water compacts and a bunch of our agreements with those Indian communities.
Time has expired. For all on the Arizona's amendment. The gentleman from California is recognized. He has 15 seconds remaining.
Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, this is an amendment that would do more harm than good, and I urge my colleagues to oppose it. Yield back the balance of my time.
All time having expired, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Request a roll call vote.
A roll call vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 112-788, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1 by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts. Amendment number 3 by Mr. Waxman of California. Amendment number 4 by Mr. Kelly of Pennsylvania. Amendment number 5 by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts. Amendment number 8 by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas. Amendment number 9 by Mr. McKinley of West Virginia. Amendment number 10 by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts. Amendment number 11 by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon. Amendment number 12 by Mr. Flake of Arizona. Amendment number 13 by Mr. Gosar of Arizona. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report 112-680 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, on which further proceedings were postponed and in which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report Number 112-680, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Members are right now voting on amendments to environment and energy regulation legislation. Republicans believe removing regulations on energy development would lead to job creation. Votes on these amendments right now, beginning with Congressman Markey of Massachusetts. This amendment would allow the Interior Department to issue mining regulations that are found to reduce instances of pulmonary diseases, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, or reduce birth defects. This is the first of 6 amendment votes. We will continue bringing you coverage of all the amendment votes as they happen here on C-SPAN. While these votes are underway, we are also hoping to bring you 2 end-of-session wrap-up briefings, starting with House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. She's expected to start in just a couple of minutes at about 10:30. The other briefing would be with House Speaker John Boehner, just giving a look at what members have accomplished this session and what they hope to do when they return. Speaker Boehner is expected to start at 11:15, and as I said, we hope to bring you both of those hearings as they become available. Another thing we want to mention this morning, the House Ethics Committee is meeting on Capitol Hill discussing possible violations by California Congresswoman Maxine Waters. She's alleged to have benefited from steering bailout money to a bank where her husband is a shareholder. She says this will be the first time she gets to defend herself against the allegations. She is attending the hearing, but we don't believe that she will testify today. We are covering that hearing live right now on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. It started at 9:15. While this 15-minute vote is underway here in the House, we'll hear from Texas Republican Congressman Joe Barton. He was on this morning's Washington Journal to discuss the Republicans' agenda in the House and the fall elections.
Welcome, Congressman Joe Barton, Republican of Texas, member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Thanks very much for being with us.
Glad to be with you.
Let me ask you about some of the things that Congress will not accomplish this year. One is the Farm Bill. Why such an inability to get a major piece of legislation through a Republican-controlled House?
Well, it's a Republican House, but a Democrat Senate, so you've got to keep that in mind. I think the primary reason is that some of the more conservative Republicans, and I certainly consider myself to be a conservative Republican, want to really take a look at the cost of not just the farm program, but all the programs. And so you have a disagreement, if that's the right term, about the spending levels. Having said that, I think the majority of the House Republicans would vote for a farm bill if it's put up on the floor and some amendments are made in order, so some of these issues could be worked out through the regular order on floor votes. And hopefully when we come back in November after the election, we'll get that worked out.
Let me put this in perspective and giving full courtesy to the New York Times, which has been writing about this, calling it the least productive Congress in a generation. This Congress passing 173 public laws as of last month. Now, as a comparison, the so-called do-nothing Congress that President Harry Truman ran against back in 1948, in the same 2-year time period, passing 906 laws. It's a huge difference. Now, some may say that's a good thing because that means fewer regulations. Others are using this as a metric on what Congress is or isn't doing.
I wouldn't rate the Congress on how many laws it's passed. We could pass a resolution proclaiming National Donut Day, and that would be a law, but that doesn't mean it's substantive. The issue really is you have a Republican-controlled House and a Democratic-controlled Senate and I'd say a fairly left-of-center president. So there are real disagreements between what we think the solutions are, and we've passed a number of bills in the House that I thought were very good pieces of legislation that didn't even get a hearing in the Senate. So it's not all bad that we haven't gotten some of these, a bunch of bills done, but I think on the big issues, you know, we do need to address the deficit. We do need to address spending. I think we need to pass a constitutional amendment requiring a balanced budget to the states. And the House has passed some of those bills. The Senate didn't even take up the budget. The Senate, I think a majority of the Senate voted against the balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. So, you know, we have divided government, and when you have divided government, you don't have consensus. And when you don't have consensus, you don't get a lot done.
Michael Horowitz testifying on Capitol Hill. He is, of course, the Inspector General for the Justice Department, out with his 471-page report looking at the Fast and Furious operation. According to the New York Times, Republicans focused on the Inspector General's findings that included the Deputy Assistant Attorney General, who was supposed to be aware of what was happening and approving this operation, was not fully informed of everything that was going on. And your colleague, Representative Elijah Cummings, a Democrat from Maryland, had this to say as part of the questioning before the House Oversight Committee.
I also want to commend the Attorney General. I have lost count of how many times he has testified on this issue, but he has remained even-handed, respectful, and always true to the daunting and critical mission of the department he leads. He requested this IG investigation, and he has already put numerous reforms in place. To that end, I note that the administration did not assert executive privilege over any part of the Inspector General's report, or over any of the documents relied on by the Inspector General. In fact, the department went a step further. Yesterday, it sent to this committee more than 300 pages of additional documents that were withheld previously.
Congressman Barton, your reaction to your colleague, Democrat Elijah Cummings, and also the report by Michael Horowitz, are you satisfied?
Well, first of all, I have great respect for Congressman Cummings. I think he's an outstanding congressman and a man of integrity. But I would say that what he said was truthful, but perhaps he didn't tell the entire story. The Attorney General was held in contempt of Congress. That's unprecedented, I think. The Attorney General did withhold documents and refused to give documents to the committees that were investigating Fast and Furious. And they did, my recollection is that they did at some point in the document request from the House claim executive privilege. Now, what Congressman Cummings just said was that in the investigation by the Inspector General, whatever the Inspector General requested of the Attorney General provided. So it's possible that the Attorney General, was more forthcoming with the Inspector General than he was with the House of Representatives. So far as what Congressman Cummings said, I think he is telling the truth as he knows it, and he's given his opinion, which that's what congressmen are supposed to do. But there is a broader picture, and again, it is extremely unusual, if not unprecedented, for an Attorney General of the United States who is entrusted as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the executive branch to be held in contempt of Congress.
A couple of issues. This is from Chris on our Twitter page. Congressman Barton, who was the last Republican president to submit a balanced budget to Congress?
Well, Ronald Reagan, for one, because I voted for it in 1985. It didn't get many votes, but I was one of them. You know, President Bush submitted budgets that balanced. The second President Bush, we had 4 balanced budgets on a cash flow basis under President Clinton and the first year that President Bush was president.
Were the Bush-era tax cuts a mistake as we look at a deficit now or a debt at $16 trillion?
Our problem is not tax revenue. Our problem is spending. I think the Bush tax cuts were a positive effect, a tonic for the economy.
But Democrats then say with those tax cuts, in addition to the 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, the development of a new Department of Homeland Security, that the Congress and the President, both Democrats and Republicans, did not do enough to pay for those operations.
Well, my Democrat friends enjoy spending money. They don't enjoy paying for what they spend. There's this little thing called the Laffer curve, and it may be out of date to talk about it, but it's just kind of a bell-shaped curve, and as you take tax rates down, you get more revenue, because people work harder and more wealth is created. We've shown that time and again. So the Bush tax cuts, I think, created a lot more wealth than they lost tax revenue. And you see, while revenues did go down slightly for a period of time, our problem is that spending has been going up in some years at almost double-digit rates, and we've got no plan. The Democrats certainly have no plan to bring that under control. The President's budget that he has to submit to Congress each year doesn't show a deficit under, I think, $500 billion to $1 trillion at any time. At any time.
Michelle, good morning to you. Greenville, North Carolina, Republican line. Go ahead, please.
Morning. I am just very excited to speak to the congressman. I just want to let you know that I'm an African American and I plan to vote for Mitt Romney. And I changed my registration to Republican because of what's going on in the country now. I'm very worried about my children, and not really as much for me, but it's not fair for my kids to have to deal with what the problems that are going on now. They should have a clean slate just like I was able to when I was growing up. I just wanted to just say thank you so much for, I know that Republicans only have the House, and thank you for trying to do all that you can. But I know it's hard because there are a lot of things that the media will not let the people know or try to withhold, especially what's going on in Libya.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll get a response.
Well, I want to thank her for switching registration and thank her for deciding to vote for Governor Romney. She and I are in the same boat. I'm going to vote for the governor also. I do think that the Republican Party has a great message for African Americans. We're the party of hope and opportunity and inclusion. And in my congressional district down in Texas, I've got a large number of African American supporters, and I value their input and support greatly. So we're glad to have her as a part of the Republican Party, I believe, in North Carolina.
To your point about the balanced budget amendment, though, one of our viewers saying we do not need to amend the Constitution to balance the budget. We need Representative Barton to do his job.
Well, if every other congressman voted the way I have voted for the last 28 years, we would have had a lot more balanced budgets. The Twitterer, if that's the correct term.
Remarks from Congressman Joe Barton on Washington Journal this morning. We will leave it here to get remarks from House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi as members are preparing to leave for their break today. Very quickly, we're just learning that the House Ethics Committee has cleared California Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters of ethics violations. Those results revealed during a House hearing on the Hill this morning. And now Minority Leader Pelosi.
Okay. Oh gosh, I can change this. Good morning.
Good morning.
As you can see, Democrats are proudly standing on the steps of the Capitol, saying we must stay here until we take action to help the American people. We are prepared to stay in session to pass President Obama's jobs bill, which can create more than 1 million new jobs immediately. Pass a 5-year farm bill. 16 million agricultural jobs depend on it. Extend middle-income tax cuts to provide certainty for millions of Americans and help our economy. And to pass a comprehensive and balanced bill to address our fiscal concerns. To say to the world that we can get the job done, that we can work in a cooperative manner to reduce the deficit, to create growth, to create jobs. We're here standing together to recognize that since August 3rd, when Congress adjourned, and November 14th, when we are being called back into session, we will have been in session only 8 days. That's just not right. Democrats are prepared to stay until we get the job done. That's what we are elected to do, to get the job done. So, just in closing, I will say that one of the most important issues that we face in our country that is going to be decided in the election is the issue of Medicare. The Republicans in the House of Representatives have voted 6 times to end the Medicare guarantee. And that will cost seniors $6,400 more as they give tax breaks to people making over $1 million a year of $160,000. That's just not right. Democrats are committed to reigniting the American dream, to build ladders of opportunity for people who want to work hard, play by the rules, take responsibility. We'll remove obstacles to that, and so that they will have success. We know we have work to do. That's why we must stay here to do it. Now I'm pleased to yield to our distinguished whip, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you, Madam Leader. What we are seeing this week is a convulsing end to a dismal Congress. 2 distinguished political scientists in our country said this: the GOP has become an insurgent outlier in American politics. It is ideologically extreme, scornful of compromise, unmoved by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, dismissive of the legitimacy of political opposition. Republicans are leaving town with a stack of unfinished business that the public expects us to get done. Chief among them are the need to create jobs and avert the fiscal cliff set to hit in January if Congress fails to act. Democrats have been ready to work with Republicans to replace the sequester they imposed last year by reaching a big and balanced solution to deficits. However, Republicans have walked away from compromise every time, as those 2 political scientists said, insisting on putting tax breaks for millionaires ahead of a balanced solution. They've also held tax cuts for the middle class hostage to that same cause. Instead of wasting time on partisan messaging bills, as we've done this week, Republicans ought to have used this time to consider the Senate's bipartisan farm bill. Farmers across the country are facing the worst drought in decades, and Republicans refused to act. This is simply irresponsible, and Republicans ought to come back and finish their work, not cut and run and walk away from the American people. Shame on them. Shame on them for abandoning our farmers, our economy, and families who need us to act. Now let me turn the microphone over to my friend, the Assistant Leader, Mr. Clyburn. But let me say this about our caucus. We are fired up and ready to stay. We're fired up and ready to stay here and do the work for the American people. Thank you very much. Jim Clyburn of South Carolina.
Thank you so much. It's great to be introduced by a refrain born in the great state of South Carolina. Throughout the entire 112th Congress, the Republican majority in the House have put their own political interest ahead of the interests of the American people, and we see a continuation of that this week. The Senate passed the middle-class tax cut, and the President has said that he will sign it as soon as it hits his desk, but the Republican leadership refuses to bring it to the floor and allow it to be voted on. The only thing standing between the American middle class and working people and their tax cut is the Republican leadership in the House and their Tea Party adherents. Congress should not leave town without passing the middle-class tax cut. Now, as one of those people, the 47%, the middle class, I'm here to say that Democrats are ready to work on behalf of the American people and to deliver the tax cut that they so genuinely deserve. And with that, I am proud to yield to my friend, John Lawson of Connecticut.
Thank you, Jim. I'm proud to stand with our members who are prepared to stay and work at the job they were sent here to do on behalf of the people that were sworn to serve. This is personal. People back home cannot understand the work ethic of this Congress. They don't understand why we're not staying here to get the job done. They've seen them over the last several weeks perpetuate a myth that President Clinton so successfully debunked at the convention about work requirements. The only requirement for work is that Republicans stay here and work instead of cutting and running. We're ready to do the job that we're sent here to do. We're here to get a jobs bill in front of the American people. We want to work and get the job done, and that's why we rely on the great strength of our leader, the vice chairman of this caucus, Javier Becerra.
Our chairman is fired up, I believe. Every single member who is standing here is saying something to the American people. We are here to represent our constituents. We're here to represent all those Americans. And we're here to represent every single one of those Americans that lives in this counts. We're ready to work for every American who wants to go to work. We are here to say to our colleagues, don't cut and run. It's time for us to roll up our sleeves and show the American people that we can do this bipartisanly. But it's not just American taxpayers. It's not just American workers. It's not just American farmers that are being left behind today. Back in April, the U.S. Senate passed by an overwhelming majority a bill to help women who suffer from domestic violence. The Violence Against Women Act passed by 68 votes in the Senate, and it has been languishing since April in the House of Representatives. Every day in America, a woman dies of domestic violence, and behind her is another woman, and behind her is another. 3 women in America die every day as a result of domestic violence, and since April, this House of Representatives, under Republican majority leadership, has been unwilling to put the Violence Against Women Act up for a vote. So it's not just American workers, it's not just American farmers, and it's not just American taxpayers who are being left behind by those who wish to cut and run in this House of Representatives. It is women who are fighting for their very lives. Each and every member who's standing behind me is here to say, we're ready to work. Ready to work for farmers, ready to work for American taxpayers, ready to work for folks who want to get back to work, and we are ready to work for every single American woman who is saying we want to have the respect that we deserve to not be the victims of violence. Pass the Violence Against Women Act. Now don't go home until you do it. We will do that if the Republicans will stay. And with that, let me introduce to you our ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee, Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you, Javier. I'm proud to stand with my colleagues to say we want to stay. Congressional Republicans want to run away. But you know what? You can run, but you cannot hide from your record, and you cannot hide from what you want to do. I can understand, looking at what they plan to do, why they want to hide from the American people. But President Obama and congressional Democrats, we're going to make sure that people hold our colleagues accountable. The President has said to Congress, stay and pass the middle-class tax cut. Yeah. We need to make sure we extend tax relief to 98% of the American people. In fact, 100% of the American people would get tax relief on their first $250,000. 98% of the American people would get full tax relief. 97% of all pass-through businesses would get tax relief. The Republican position has been no. Unless people like Mitt Romney, unless companies like Bain Capital, unless they get a bonus tax break, nobody else in America can get tax relief. So it's no wonder that they want to cut and run, especially when you look at their next plan. Take a look at the Ryan-Romney budget, the Romney-Ryan budget. What do they want to do? Another round of big tax breaks for very wealthy people like Mitt Romney at the expense of everybody else. Because if you're serious about dealing with our long-term deficit, as we all should be, and we all are, then the question is, how do you choose to do that? And if you provide another round of big tax breaks for people like Mitt Romney, it means you're going to cut seniors on Medicare. Give them a voucher that declines in value compared to rising health care costs. Leave them paying the bill so you can give another round of tax breaks to folks at the very top. Cut our kids' education, investments in our future necessary to power our economy. So I can understand, in some ways, why they're cutting and running. But again, we're not going to let them hide from their record, and we're not going to let them hide from what they plan to do to this country, because we are not going to take a U-turn back to the same failed trickle-down policies that got our country into such a mess to begin with. We need to move forward, and that's what my colleagues I want to stay here to do. Thank you all very much.
Stay here to work.
Yeas are 174. The nays are 229. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report 112-680 by the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-680, offered by Mr. Waxman of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
So the House now holding the second of 12 votes, including amendments to environment and energy regulation legislation. 2-minute voting on amendments now, beginning in this one from Congressman Waxman of California, that would strike language from the bill that repeals the EPA's scientific findings regarding the harmful health effects of carbon pollution. Again, this is the second of 12 votes. 2-minute voting underway now. Legislative work expected to finish today before 1 p.m. Eastern. We just saw House Minority Leader Pelosi and a number of Democratic leaders on the steps of the Capitol this morning, reinforcing the Democrats' position on job growth and the economy as members are preparing to leave for the election break. Shortly, we are expecting comments from House Speaker John Boehner. He gives his wrap-up. We plan to have that live as soon as it starts. Inside the chamber, members continuing votes on amendments to environment and energy regulation legislation. And very quickly, a follow-up to a story we mentioned earlier. A House Ethics Committee has met this morning in the case of ethics violations regarding California Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters. That House panel is set to clear Congresswoman Waters. While the committee has released a report saying she is cleared, the committee has to vote on that report.
Mr. Schrader. Mr. Schrader votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 178, the nays are 229. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 4, printed in House Report 112-680 by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly, on which further proceedings were postponed, in which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 112-680, offered by Mr. Kelly of Pennsylvania.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is in order. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House holding the third of 12 votes this morning, including amendments to environment and energy regulation legislation. This amendment brought by Congressman Kelly of Pennsylvania would require the Transportation Department to issue a report on the number of jobs lost, fatalities, injuries, and other economic costs resulting from new emission standards for cars made after the year 2017. 2-minute voting underway in the House.
Oh, the yeas are 242, the nays are 168. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 5, printed in House Report 112-680 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in House Report number 112-680, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.